Lady Portia Featherington and Penelope. Let's get into it. In my last video analysis, I mentioned how I thought that perhaps Portia had been sabotaging Penelope this whole entire time. And the evidence was very much, in fact, there. Her constant lack of awareness for Penelope and her constantly putting Penelope down, and a lot of the times how she was just dismissive of Penelope in whether public or private situations, and allowed her sisters to constantly bully her and make comments on her weight, and just her disbelief that her daughter was able to catch anything on the debutante scene. It was just all really discouraging, and it's never how a mother should behave towards her daughter. I said previously that either she's doing this out of straight malice or she's simply that ignorant, and I thought nothing else of it. In fact, I was expecting more of Lady Danbury to take a pseudo mother rule in the books like I explained in my previous video, and yet Bridgerton Season 3 Part 2 surprised me. Now, this does not mean that I'm a fan of Portia by any means, but I do like this arc that they have given her and Penelope, and it's the least Penelope deserves. So let's talk about it. But if you guys don't know who I am, hi, my name is Deborah, student, singer, songwriter, and everything else in between. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about my favorite TV shows and books. Let's get to it. So let's start with the scene that has changed everything. Colin fighting for Penelope. When Penelope's engagement was announced in the whistledown papers, Portia's first and initial reaction was to start berating Penelope and asking how she or what she could have possibly done to obtain a marriage proposal from Colin, even trying to possibly suggest maybe blackmail or something before she was cut off. Not to mention, she also slandered the Bridgertons as well, and also made some unseemly comments. I actually do kind of understand why she would be surprised or suspicious of her being married to a Bridgerton, because we cannot forget the last time they fell out of favor in society. It was the Bridgertons who were the first to shun them. But that's also because they scammed Colin out of a lot of money. Now, that was not Penelope's fault, but reasonably so, they were shunned by the Bridgerton family. But at the same time, I also understand Portia's side of things and why she would be a little bit hesitant or scared when her own daughter gets married to a Bridgerton. Despite her wanting that for so long, she probably thought perhaps the bridges had been just so burnt with that family. But when Colin had came to Penelope's defense, as he should have, and put Lady Portia in her place, and also called her out for being so much focused on her social standing and her social status rather than her daughter, I absolutely loved that, because it needed to be said. Mothers like Portia are more focused on what people think and say about them rather than their daughter's well-being. Now, naturally, in this time, I understand this is actually very important, as a lady's reputation is everything in this society. However, that does not excuse the blatant ignorance towards her daughter and the emotional neglect. So it was just kind of nice to have this scene where Penelope could finally be defended, because Lord knows people in real life who have this kind of family dynamic never even get to have that kind of defense in their own personal lives towards their parent who has emotionally and mentally neglected them. My surprise came in when Portia was able to actually self-reflect, and it made her more human in my eyes, and it makes her more tolerable as a character to watch, especially when she spoke to Farley afterwards, actually trying to reflect and question her own previous actions. And I loved how Farley let her know that, listen, you have been looking out for your daughters all of this time, but have you actually had that kind of discussion with them? Have you told them? Have you actually tried to show them? Which was something I loved, and it was very realistic.
I'm certain she will understand. You're only trying to protect her. Perhaps you should tell her as much.
A lot of parents constantly talk about how they have love for their children and they were just trying to do their best in some of their behaviors that weren't necessarily the greatest. However, very few of them actually explain or communicate with their children about this, and they just assume that their actions will be understood by their children, which is a human error that we also tend to make in our relationships and our friendships, so I can partly understand. However, you have to see it from this point of view. Your child has not lived your own life. They do not understand things from your own adult perspective, and they have been in a completely different situation growing up than yours. Their mental headspace is completely different. Otherwise, they would just be a clone of you. Nor do they think like you or process things like you. So it's a very big mistake that Portia made by just assuming that everything that she did would be understood by her children constantly without her having to communicate it to her daughter. And when she finally did start communicating to Penelope a little bit, and she started talking about security, it came out as so cruel and a little dismissive, because she never really explained her background or what really happened in her life to Penelope. So it just kind of came out of left field. I'm just glad that Portia was finally able to have a discussion with Penelope about this. I do think it's a little bit sad that it had to take marriage and a man to defend Penelope before she could finally be noticed by her mother. And so it does make me wonder that if Penelope had not gotten married. Would this resolution have ever come about? Maybe, but also maybe not. I do like how the show put it together eventually, but it is kind of bittersweet that it took her getting married before her mother could see her and see her wrong ways. And for that, I still give Portia the biggest side eye. However, I will also let it be. A win is a win, I guess. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Portia's backstory, because I actually do think that gives her character a little bit more of a human feel, more humanization, if you will. When she talked to Penelope about relationships and how security was a smarter decision in part 1, I do appreciate that. And I really wish we saw more of Portia's life so we could also understand her actions. Although that doesn't excuse how she treated Penelope, we can also see where she came from and why her mentality is the way it is. But this second part also just shone more light on her mentality and her psyche. A lot of the conversations she has with her is also somewhat a little bit sad, because she talks about how a lady shouldn't have dreams or doesn't have dreams, and how hopefully maybe some of a lady's dreams will be achieved through a man if they are able to, manipulate them enough. And all the sentences along those lines really shows you how she's had to live. And it's not something I blame her for. It's very much a product of the time. A lot of mothers, or a lot of women in general, had no ways outside of a man for achieving anything in life. And even at this time, where I'm guessing this is supposed to be the similar time period as writers such as Jane Austen was extremely bold for being able to be a writer and an author, and had to face her own obstacles. So I can only imagine what women like Portia were going through during that time. And truthfully, seeing anything outside of a man just didn't really seem possible, and seemed like a very unstable an unsecure position to be in society. I'm glad that Bridgerton has finally gone with a storyline instead of making Portia resent Penelope for it, because in these situations that's also very possible. So I'm glad that they chose the option of her being proud of her daughter, which was just so refreshing to see. But yes, it's also kind of sad that this is the kind of life that Portia has had to live, because she is quite an intelligent woman on her own, but her life had to be reduced to finding financial safety, security, and a husband. And at the same time, it was also the smartest decision she can make for herself. Also, the things that randomly made me laugh about this season between Portia and Penelope were the moments where she tried to change towards Penelope and it felt extremely unnatural. Like when she would tell her sisters to stop being mean to Penelope, or trying to support Penelope publicly. It was always a little bit uncomfortable because we've never seen such a display from Portia before. And a lot of the times I was even worried that this was just going to be fake. But actually it was just Portia's way of trying to connect with her daughter. Now, Portia is still Portia. She's still going to be a little bit more self-centered and a little self-absorbed, and her emotional capacity is not necessarily the biggest, but she did try in her own way. And it's in these moments you realize that your parents are not you. This is the way that they are, and she was trying in her own capacity, which I do appreciate. But there were some moments where alongside Penelope I also did cringe, especially when they were at home and she was being nice to Penelope, and Penelope looked at her and said, "I'm going to go to my room and read," because she was just so confused as to why her mother was showing her affection. It was strange to us and it was strange to her, but that also shows you how long Penelope has had to live outside of her mother's attention, that it just feels unnatural to her. I also noticed the moments between Portia and Violet Bridgerton when they finally sort of start to come to agreement as mothers, where they can both see that their children are not happy even though it's their engagement and they were fighting one another. I do appreciate that was being noticed by the both of them. Even though Lady Violet and Portia don't really have much in common, it was also great to see them have something in common, which was their children. That was just very refreshing to see. Now, let's talk about Portia finding out that Penelope was Lady Whistledown. I was actually curious as to how they were going to handle this and whether Portia would ever find out in the show. And I'm glad that it was actually done, and how she finally realized that her characteristics are very much in Penelope and they are quite similar, more than they would like to admit. Now, I did agree with her when she was pissed that Penelope kind of tanked their reputation in the whistledown columns, and especially now that we see that Portia has just been trying so hard to get the family up. Yeah, I naturally would have been pissed if my own daughter did that at the same time. Now, Penelope did have her reasons for exposing her family because they were not kind to her in the slightest, but I do appreciate the moments where she realizes that she has quite a smart daughter who is very much like her. And in fact, out of all her three daughters, Penelope is the most cunning like her mother, and also has the most scathing words, by the way, especially when there were some really iconic lines being read out from the Lady Whistledown columns. It was just so fun to see. I also loved the scene where they talked about Penelope having her own money, and I really thought it was very, very sweet of Penelope to put in her money towards her sister's ball. In the books, Penelope actually secretly just creates this fake inheritance so that her family can have money to live on. But the fact that it's actually being recognized in the show is what I really wanted for Penelope. And that moment of acknowledgement between her and Portia was just such a moment that actually made me tear up a bit, because you could recognize that this was truly a generational cycle being broken, that her mom had to constantly struggle for money, and now here her daughter has even done that before marriage. That is the definition of breaking family cycles. Not to mention that one of her sisters actually wanted her daughter to sort of be like Penelope. Is just really, really heartwarming. In this situation, you have women in this family who are breaking the generational cycles, and I loved to see it. All in all, I thought this was an amazing conclusion for Penelope and the rest of the family. I'm really surprised at how part 2 was able to put season 3 together. And I also feel like this is kind of like a Cinderella moment for Penelope, but except this time around, her 2 sisters weren't turned into frogs, like in the sequel. And while I still don't appreciate Portia's previous behavior towards Penelope, I do have a newfound respect for her. But anyways, that's just me. Let me know how you guys are feeling down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye.
Oh my, oh my.